I've hit the stop or start meeting rather button.
Okay.
Alex.
Yeah, I'm about to unmute and all that kind of fun stuff.
You need to admit Stockwell.
He had been admitted. He was having some joining issues, it looks like. We can give it a minute, though. He should be able to. He's coming.
Everybody's healthy? Everything's good?
Yeah, sure.
The nodding heads attest to a yes.
Except for the traffic on Coast Highway.
Right. You know, I drove there I don't go out in PCH on the weekends. It's nuts. I mean, people doing U-turns all over the place. I'm surprised they're not peeling bodies off that road on a daily basis.
They are. I think they closed the highway 3 times on Sunday.
Nuts.
All right. I'm all good whenever you guys want to start.
Okay. I'd like to call to order the Malibu Planning Commission regular meeting of August 3, 2020. Time goes by. This meeting is being held by teleconference due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Planning commissioners and city staff are participating from remote locations. All votes will be taken by roll call. Members of the public can participate in the meeting or watch it by going to malibucity.org/virtual meeting. At this screen, you can click on the tab to either just watch the meeting or to sign up to speak on particular items. You will only be able to speak during the meeting if you follow the instructions on the screen under the Sign Up to Speak tab. Once the item is called, no further speaker signups will be allowed. So please make sure you visit malibucity.org/virtual meeting early to download the Zoom application and sign up to speak. The recording secretary will call on those who have signed up to speak when the item is called, so you must be present in the Zoom meeting to be recognized. Can I have a roll call, Kathleen?
Yes. Commissioner Marks,
Here.
Commissioner Euring,
Here.
Commissioner Weil,
Here.
Vice Chair Mazza,
Here.
Chair Jennings.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Got to get a motion on approving the agenda.
I move the agenda be approved as staff recommends.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Let's. I guess we have to take it by roll call if that's what I said we were going to do. Call the roll, please, Kathleen.
Commissioner Marks,
Yes.
Commissioner Euring,
Yes.
Commissioner Weil,
Yes.
Vice Chair Mazza,
Yes.
Chair Jennings.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Report on the posting of the agenda.
The agenda for this meeting was properly posted on July 27th, 2020.
Takes us to item 2A, written and oral communications from the public on items not on our agenda. Do we have any speakers signed up?
We have one speaker, Craig Hill.
Okay, Mr. Hill.
Good evening, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. 3 things. First, it's good to see that the city is looking at emergency sirens and notice kiosks. I've called for them over the years, though I think the utility of sirens may be somewhat lower now, given what could be done with cell phones beyond a mere text alert. The item will be before the Public Safety Commission tomorrow night at 5. I hope that it will come to the Planning Commission for permitting to address locations and easements and how they're to be used, hours, volumes, different tones and such. And there will be some educational element. The public should have more opportunity to weigh in on all that. Secondly, Zoom meetings have become the new normal, not just a stopgap measure. So it's time to reinstitute the practice of donating speaker minutes. If there are technical factors to address, the commission should be the lab in which to smooth out the wrinkles, as it would likely be more difficult with the council. Just for example, you could say that if the donor is signed into the meeting, that's sufficient. Or if you're concerned that that would be abused by people signing in and walking away, you could request that person use the raise your hand function in Zoom. If an item has multiple donors, you could vet them all at the beginning of the item so as not to interrupt the flow once the speakers get going. You could implement a strict policy whereby if the donor is not there and ready to raise their hand within 10 seconds, you move on. Anyway, more people have become proficient with Zoom, so there should be some way to do it without bogging down the process. Third, and relatedly, For technically complex items, it would be helpful if the chair could recognize a raised hand in Zoom when a clarification might be needed. That way you could provide for the limited degree of informality that the live commission would entertain when there's a subject matter expert near the podium. Ideally, any commissioner should be able to see a raised hand and say to the chair, I'd like to hear from Mr. Haney or Mr. Ehrlich or whomever. Otherwise, you could ask Kathleen to watch for raised hands. And if that all seems too complicated, at least be mindful that you can affirmatively ask for clarifications from speakers, and might want to do that more readily, knowing that you can't see speakers squirming in their seats the way you can in a live hearing. In the end, the point is to allow for relevant information without decorum getting out of hand. And it seems there might be a more natural balance to be struck as we become more familiar with the technology and its constraints. And that's all I've got for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Any other speakers, Kathleen, on item 2A?
No, that Mr. Hill was the only one.
Okay, this item 2B, Planning Commission and staff comments and inquiries. Planning commissioners, who would like to go first? Chris, how about you? Anything?
I thought that breath would call me out. Yeah, let's see. So I'm just kind of thinking through some of what Craig Hill called out. I know we've talked about this a bit in the past. Our friendly attorney is not on the call right now. Oh, okay, sorry. So Pat, you're standing in?
Correct. Yeah, I'm standing in for Trevor. Yes.
You're friendly too, right?
So I've been told.
Okay, good. All right, good. Well, so I just wanted to kind of play a little bit with Craig's ideas. That donating time, his point to say, how do we confirm someone's there? Kind of a raised hand in software, it doesn't really do a good job. One thought, I don't know if it's something we could consider kind of technically, but I know we can show our faces. If we could show the faces of those donating time while the other's speaking, personally, I think that'd be a pretty good confirmation that someone donating time, assuming we could do that technically, would be a good quote unquote proof. They just have to have their face visible in the camera the whole time. If they step away, we'd say they lost a minute. The raised hands thing, I mean, I think they show up on the screen. I like the idea of having Kathleen call that out because it is tough to track all that. Depends on kind of how many computer monitors you have and how you're viewing, all the attendees, and it's like 3 pages or whatever. But that one I think could be valuable. I just want to echo kind of the core of what Craig is saying, and that's that how can we get this as close to in person as possible? One other thing he didn't touch, which I know there was a lot of kind of confusion and kind of back and forth during our last session on the short-term rentals. Those that had to dial in, they just couldn't get connected. The parallel in City Hall would be if your car broke down on the way to City Hall, you're kind of screwed, So are those that don't have a working computer also screwed, or can we somehow get a better way to manage those that have to dial in? Is there maybe a combination of having a dial in and like somewhere they could text? I mean, because it seemed like that technical hurdle blocked out a good portion of public comment, or some valuable public comment. I don't know what portion. I don't know exactly what held up the Sampsons, but I know that was a large contributor that maybe staff could talk to for Michael Lustig's input. So those are my thoughts. I think Craig brings up some great ideas, and I think our forum is a good one to start. Those are my thoughts, though.
Yes, John.
Going on with that, we had a meeting last time on STRs with 26 speakers. So I think we've shown that we can carry on real live subjects at real live meetings, and we ought to consider not restricting what we hear from now on. I think we've had enough time to get it down to where we can hold a real meeting. That's it.
Okay. David?
No. I'll pass.
Okay, Steve?
Unmute, Steve.
You're muted, Steve.
You're on mute. You sound great, but you're muted.
I would like to echo some of the previous comments. And I think Craig is on track saying that we should make these meetings more as close as we can to what we would have if we were doing it in person. To Chris's comment, maybe there's some way that if the speakers who want to speak at the meeting, who are not real comfortable or who are doing it for the first time, maybe there's something that we could, or maybe Zoom's got to do this, something where they can call in ahead of time. There's some test they can go through. They can try and get online. They can try and make sure that they're communicating. So they've got confidence before the meeting starts that they've got all the tools and the stuff they need to get in. That may make it a little bit easier. But that's got. I would assume there's got to be some additional development to make that happen.
Okay.
Chris had his hand up.
Sorry, just a couple quick ones, if I may. With John's thoughts, as we go towards more difficult topics, I think that time contribution is really key, because I know a lot of the times the successful arguments presented to either us or council is kind of by a community nominating one person. Without being able to extend that time to like 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes, we lose that kind of that leverage that a smaller community has. Also, some of the things Steve brought up, I know in that tool that Kathleen uses to manage time, I know she can show the clock on there. Maybe she could show like the number of hands raised or something, because again, just some way. I'm trying to make an equivalent to looking at the audience, and you kind of make eye contact with somebody, and it's clear they're fidgeting in their seat, they're kind of raising their hands, they're waving around. Just some parallel to that. I just don't know what it would look like so that we would all see it. And then the last bit on that is, would we want to have, like, let's just say that Norman wants to talk and he's got his hand raised and we all see that. Do we need to have a formal vote on that to say we're going to allow him to speak? Or could it just be that, Steve says, hey, I see Norm has his hand raised, I'd like to hear his thoughts. Or even one of us could just call someone out in the audience. I mean, I think those are the things that we need to still sort out on this topic.
Right. Well, there are a couple of things. One, when we started the Zoom meetings, the lack of time donation was sort of baked into it. That wasn't our decision. It was a decision through the administrative process. Secondly, you have to be careful when you're holding a public hearing on a quasi-judicial matter. You have to stick within the time limits that are allowed, and you have problems if you're willy-nilly calling people back up because they raise their hand. That can kind of get out of control, and you end up giving one side or the other excessive amounts of time. So yeah, all of these things can be worked out. I mean, we worked them out when we did live hearings, we just have to hope that staff can educate us on the process of moving more toward the live meetings. I know that from what I've heard from a lot of the applicants and their representatives, that they're not delighted with the way current meetings are going, but we'll just have to see.
And what are they concerned about? What are they concerned about?
I'm sorry, what?
What are they concerned about?
They're concerned about the inability to read the questions and to see the eyes of the people and to know what kinds of questions need to be addressed and things like that. That's what I've heard. So I'm not putting it forward as something that I agree with or disagree with. I'm just saying that they're not entirely pleased with it from what I've heard. Bonnie.
A couple things regarding this. We've been trying to stick with the same protocol that the city council has allowed, just for consistency's sake. I agree with what Chair Jennings has said in terms of sometimes the meetings, the in-person meetings could get a little overly informal with back and forth dialogue with the audience and stuff, which I recognize. It's nice to be able to do that and get questions answered and things like that, but there is a due process concern and fairness concern, just making sure that everybody is allowed the same amount of time. As far as donating minutes, that does present some complications. It is within the chair's purview to grant extra time when somebody asks for it, and that would be a simpler way to do this at the chair's discretion. If you want to entertain that, that would be my suggestion in the meantime. And then also with respect to if any of the commissioners had an additional question for someone from the audience or wanted to hear from somebody for an additional minute, I would suggest requesting that through the chair. Let's see, I don't know if we can look into some of the things that you've brought up and whether it'd be possible to make it possible to see the speakers' faces. However, again, we're trying to stay consistent with what the city council's protocols have been, although I hear what you're saying and that, that you guys have certainly demonstrated the ability to conduct these meetings successfully. So anything else on that, or shall I make my announcements?
Go ahead.
Okay. I just want to bring to everybody's attention, first of all, hello and welcome, that on Thursday this week at 4 p.m., the City Council Subcommittee called Zoraces will be meeting, Zoning Ordinance Revisions and Code Enforcement Subcommittee. The subcommittee is going to be looking at parking as a standalone use. This is actually an item we have scheduled 3 times previously and had to cancel the meetings, this Zoraces meeting, because of, I think the first time was a quorum issue, the second time was the Woolsey fire, and the third time was the pandemic. So we're crossing our fingers that we can actually hold the meeting this Thursday and discuss this important amendment to the Muni Code and the LCP. On August 10th, the City Council will be considering the what we loosely call the interim ordinance on short-term rentals. We're trying to be more specific about it and refer to it as the zoning text amendment 17002, just to make it clear which thing we're talking about. This is the item that the City Council looked at in December of 2019, and more recently in June, I think on the 22nd, they asked us to bring it back to put in place some regulatory tools for short-term rentals while the other amendment is going through. Speaking of the item that you guys reviewed at the last Planning Commission meeting, we anticipate getting that scheduled for City Council on a September agenda. And we'll have public noticing and things like that start up pretty soon about that. Let's see, with regard to the sirens, those will go through all the standard environmental review and be processed with coastal development permits. So there will be an opportunity for public input on the siren project going forward. Let's see, I think that's it for now.
Okay, commission questions. Chris, see your hand.
2. First, just to Attorney Donegan, any feedback from your perspective, like anything in the conversation kind of brought up by Craig Hill that raises red flags or concerns? And then I have one other follow-up for Bonnie.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this is somewhat of a novel, kind of new paradigm going forward. I can see it kind of both ways. I get this idea that, hey, the Planning Commission could potentially be kind of a lab, so to speak, and we can kind of test things out and go back and forth. However, those concerns that Bonnie did raise about not necessarily only due process, but this kind of idea that the more potentially tech advanced may have somewhat of a benefit. Now, I understand people are very much on board with Zoom, people use it, et cetera, but kind of the more levels and different technological aspects we implement, once again, it's not to say that it's impossible, because it's not. If that's something that we decide that we want to do, I think it is capable, but there'd likely have to be one, if not 2 or 3 stopgap measures, and that could be as simple as, hey, if you can't get through or something's wrong, you have call or email staff person. And so it's kind of just one of these things where the more intricate you build up the system, the more there's just potential ways for it to get bogged down. Now, moving forward, if this is the new normal and that's kind of what we want to do, it's definitely feasible, albeit it has to be likely incremental with lots of caution, if that makes sense.
Makes sense, and thank you for that. And then the other questions for Director Blue. Just for the process, what will be heard on August 10th. So if we want to familiarize yourself with what's on the agenda, obviously we can check the staff report now, but it'll be reflecting or based on the ZTA, which was put together in 2017, 17-002. That'll be what they're going to be reviewing for the interim ordinance.
It's been updated based on the council's input from well, let's see, it was updated in terms of what we presented in December of 2019. So it's been a little further updated to kind of be structured in a way similar to the ordinance that you just looked at, so that it would be a seamless transition from one to the other. So yes, the packet for the August 10th meeting has been published, so it's available online right now.
Got it. And sorry, Stephen, I might have the same question, so I'll try first. Then since this one goes basically as a ZTA through Zerasis, sorry, just straight to council, and then our proposal, quote unquote, our proposal, the one we just went through on Wednesday, would also go through ZTA. It's really fundamentally the same process on both ordinances.
The reason that the one that council is going to look at on August 10th, next Monday, the reason that didn't come back to you is that you had already weighed in on it. So, and they were interested in having it come back to them as quick as possible in order to take advantage of these regulatory tools and, you know, an enhanced way to deal with violators. So that is coming straight back to council next Monday.
Okay, I guess my follow-on would just be, could they just hear theoretically the same ZTA we just worked on? That's like, it's kind of the same vehicle at least.
Yeah, so that one has to be, has to have a 21-day notice for council. So that's why we can't get to it until September.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Sorry for that.
No problem.
Steve.
Real quick question, Bonnie. You know, the interim ordinance, let me go back. One of the things that we've heard is because we have sort of grandfathered in all these people that have currently got short-term rentals, it's difficult to take it away from them. Are you comfortable that whatever this in, I have not read it yet, it's been a long time, but if it does something different than the ordinance we came up with on Wednesday night, that it will not become this grandfathered process that says we can't take it away? I mean, we're going to have the ability to quickly go to the other ordinance that's passed. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, the council can make the switch whenever they're ready to. I mean, as soon as they adopt the, you know, when the ordinance that you just looked at last week comes before them, as soon as they adopt this and, you know, deal with the local coastal program amendment, if they agree that it's needed, it can go into effect and supersede the ZTA 17002.
So there's strong language in this interim ordinance that says it can be overridden when the other ordinance gets done. Is that a fair statement?
It's not necessary to have that language in. All the council has to do is adopt a new ordinance. So there's not language in the ordinance itself that says anything about superseding. It is mentioned in the staff report that when the other ordinance gets adopted and everything, that it can supersede that one. But there's no need to have language that says that, because the council can take that action whenever they want.
If I'm allowed to do something under this interim ordinance that I'm not going to be allowed to do if the other ordinance comes in, doesn't that encourage me to try and make an argument if it's getting taken away from me later on down the road?
I can't really speculate about what somebody might argue. I'm assuming that all that kind of public comment will come out and at the council hearing. But
yeah, it just seems like I'm potentially setting myself up for a problem, but go ahead.
It doesn't give a legal right. The council, as Bonnie said, the council can make these regulatory rules and change them and make them less stringent or more stringent as it chooses. No council can bind any later council as to what it wants to do. So I don't think I don't think it's a real problem that you're concerned about. I think
Well, I mean, I listened to Trevor when he goes through his thing and says, you know, we're doing short-term rentals now, and we can't take them away from these people. So I'm not sure if you guys are the legal experts. I'm just saying, seems to me maybe a problem.
Okay. That takes us to the consent calendar. We've got 3 items on the consent calendar. Oh, I'm sorry, John.
Very, very quick question. Bonnie, are you going to be here in September for that meeting?
Yes,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Here's for October.
3 items on the consent calendar. Are any of them any that the commissioners want to pull? Okay. Are there any, Kathleen, are there any that want to be pulled by the?
I'd like to pull 3B3.
Yeah, if you don't, I will, John, if you don't, okay.
Okay. Any members of the public, Kathleen, who have indicated a desire to have one of these consent items pulled?
No, people are on hand for questions, but other than that, no.
Okay, so item 3B1 is a receive and file, and item 2 requires a motion. So I'll have a motion to approve items 3B1 and 2.
So moved.
A second? Oh, take your pick.
Got it? All right. Call the roll, please, Kathleen.
Commissioner Marks,
Yes.
Vice Chair Mazza,
Yes.
Commissioner Euring,
Yes.
Commissioner Weil,
Yes.
Chair Jennings,
Yes.
motion carries.
Okay, Kathleen, that'll take us now to 3B3. 3B3 is an administrative coastal development permit with a site plan review and a minor mod. This is for the property at 29215 Cliffside Drive. We have a staff report, please. Hi, Renika.
Okay, there we go. Just pull up my talking points. Good evening, Chair Jennings and members of the Planning Commission. This item is the receive and file of Administrative Coastal Permit 16-062 that was approved, recently approved by the Planning Director on July 28th, 2020. Next slide, please. The site is located at the northwest corner of Cliffside and Dune Drive, surrounded by 1- and 2-story residential development to the northwest and east, and by the Point Dune Natural Preserve to the south. The site is currently developed with an existing single-family residence and associated development that totals approximately 9,800 square feet of TDSF. Next slide, please. The project consists of demolition of more than 50% of the exterior walls for the existing single-family residence, the complete demolition of a detached guest house that totals about 3,200 square feet, also the complete removal of a detached garage, the demolition of a swimming pool and a tennis court. Next slide, please. And in its place, the demolition of more than 50% of the exterior walls for the main house results in a replacement structure. And also with regard to the guest house, the demolished guest house would be replaced by an 895 square foot second unit with a 895 square foot basement. The project also includes the construction of a new swimming pool, spa, grading, a new OWTS, and associated development. Next slide, please. After the application was approved by the planning director, several concerns have been raised regarding the project. The first of which was a question about how the front yard setback was determined. And according to the LIP's definition of front yards, specifically for corner lots, the front yard is determined by the most narrow street frontage. So although this particular site takes access off of Dune Drive, the front yard determination is consistent with the LIP. There was also a concern about non-conforming walls and landscaping that are located, that were previously approved by the Coastal Commission. These walls and landscaping are located in a 30-foot right-of-way that runs along Cliffside Drive and Doom Drive. In that CDP issued by the Coastal Commission, staff was unable to verify the height of the approved landscaping in this area. So a condition has been approved, added to the project. That's condition number 20 in your NOD that requires the hedges that form a wall to be maintained no taller than 42 inches if it's within 5 feet of the right of way, and no more than 6 feet if it's greater than 5 feet of the right of way. Next slide, please. There was also a concern about the city's treatment of this coastal permit as administrative. And in LIP section 13.13, there is a list of types of development that will qualify for administrative process. Assuming that none of the exceptions apply. Those exceptions to the administrative treatment include areas that are within the appealable zone for the Coastal Commission, or coastal permits that include discretionary requests that require the Planning Commission's approval. Next slide, please. There was also a question about the accuracy of the total development square footage. And this slide is just a snapshot of the existing TDSF and the proposed TDSF with this approval. The existing residence, guest house, and garage, like I mentioned before, total a little over 9,800 square feet, which is not compliant with the current standard. I believe by code, the property allows a maximum of 7,161 square feet of total development square footage. And there was a slight error in the staff report regarding the first floor square footage. I basically superimposed the 4 and the 1 in the first floor square footage. So highlighted here is the correct first and second floor square footage proposed in this application. The actual TDSF approved in this coastal permit is 7108, which is just under the maximum TDSF allowed for the property. Next slide, please. And with that, that does conclude staff's brief presentation on this administrative coastal permit. And with that, staff recommends that the Planning Commission receive and file the Planning Director's approval of this coastal permit. I believe the property owner and applicant team are also available for any questions, as am I. Thank you.
Okay, the issue before us, commissioners, is whether there are 3 votes to have this matter brought back for a full CDP hearing. I think what we're going to have to do, I take it, John, you weren't just pulling this for questions?
No, I'm pulling it to bring it back for a full hearing.
Right. Okay. So let's do ex parte disclosures, please. Let's start with Chris.
Yes, I did a site visit. I also talked through some details of the project with Don Schmitz.
Steve?
None.
David?
Site visit and also talked some details of the project.
And John?
None.
None. Okay, so we're going to open the public hearing now. We got, who's on the project team here?
So Scott Gillen is having technical difficulties, and we were trying to get him to call in Parker or Alex. So if you can bear with us momentarily. I don't know.
I need to clarify something.
It was
I quoted the wrong, I have nothing to disclose on this one. I was talking about the wrong project. My mistake, my mistake.
I did speak with Scott, not Don, on this project.
Sorry about that. Caught myself.
Question?
Yes, John.
Do we hold full hearings on consent items?
Well, it's no longer a consent item. Now it's a matter where there's a motion to, your motion, I presume will be your motion to bring it back for a full CDP. The applicant has an opportunity to to address that,
Okay.
if we can get them.
If you can just bear with me one more minute, I'm going to see if he is calling Parker or Alex.
While we're waiting to this, John, maybe it would be useful if you would go through the things that you're concerned about. That way, when they do come on, they'll have some idea of what your concerns are, and rather than having to address every possible concern, they can address the ones that you have in mind.
One favor, just if the applicant is not on the line, then they wouldn't be aware of what
You
John
can't
had
hear.
said. Yeah.
Well, I assume Don Schmitz has something to do with it, correct?
I don't believe
No.
No.
with this project.
No, I had misstated the project. I
Okay,
gave
I'm sorry.
disclosures on the wrong project. That was my mistake for the confusion.
Now, is the property owner applicant, have they expressed, I guess, difficulty in connecting or also viewing this meeting, or both?
Kathleen?
I am checking that out. I'm not certain. Maybe Renika.
In his email, he said he can't log in. So maybe he's watching via YouTube.
Okay. If that's the case, I do apologize. I may slow things down here a bit. Any type of discussion or analysis may be somewhat not futile, but maybe not the best if the goal and purpose is to allow the applicant and or property owner to hear it and then respond. Obviously, we can't sit here for all night, but to the extent that the chair and the commission feel the need to grant a few minutes here, I think it would be best not to do any substantive discussions.
Substantive, if I'm hearing you correctly, you don't want my suggestion that John talk about it. You want to wait until the applicant gets an opportunity to speak first, right?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
Okay, fine.
Yes, Chair.
All right. Chris?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, Renika, as they come on, I'm assuming, have they seen your presentation? They're aware of what you presented as well, so there'd be nothing new to them for getting them up to speed?
It was just a summary of the NOD, so I assume they've read the NOD.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an assumption, but I believe they have.
I'm just thinking along the lines of where Attorney Donegan was going, that we might need to restate that just so they have full context. I'm not sure, but as they come on, we'll make the call.
I think that part's probably fine. The only change from the staff report was that Renika clarified that there was two digits were transposed in part of the text, but the all of the conditions of approval and the end of the agenda that talk about square footage are correct. So I don't think there was anything that Scott would not have been aware of.
Okay.
For any other applicants that are listening, we would encourage you to call in well early for a meeting. And we do have staff people that can help you walk through the process if you have problems or you need a backup solution besides participating on a computer.
David, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was thinking if it's not procedurally out of order, could we table this, go to item 5A and come back to it? Or alternatively, could we take a straw vote on this now and see whether there's even a need to go beyond whatever the straw vote would indicate?
Well, all right. So I have a problem with taking a straw vote before giving the applicant an opportunity to be heard. I don't think we can really do that. And as far as as putting a pin in this and moving forward, I think we've got some problems with personnel. I think we've got maybe a recusal that's going to have to be taken care of. So,
Excuse me, Chair, I think Scott is calling Parker now. So hopefully within a very short time, we'll have him.
In the meantime, Pat, Trevor has always told us on consent items that we can't discuss a lot. There has to be a real hearing. How far are we going to take this?
So Assistant City Attorney Ruson's previous advice is well founded. That is something that I will encourage. Yes, you shouldn't get into the weeds of the project and different conditions, et cetera, as you put forward accurately here. This is basically whether to bring it back as a full one or not. in this instance, since the applicant is at least trying to, I think it's fine to hear from him or her. And then kind of after that, kind of, let the commission, do its thing and discuss it. But yes, you are right. It won't be a serious, in-depth discussion of the project per se, rather whether to bring it back or not.
Chris?
Sorry, and I'm just kind of using time here. I'm just thinking through, how before the meeting, we typically have kind of everybody like check in generally, then we kind of go into the waiting room. My thought is we might want to adjust, like whoever's got an item for them to connect in that window, because like this is just tough on all of us. And if we had at least the applicants connect or whoever they see as their team, just an idea for process.
We encourage people to do.
Okay, perfect.
Yes, Steve.
Yeah, just a note. I mean, I think we're setting back to what John's point is. I mean, and the city attorney, we're setting a precedent here, because I don't remember any other time where we've had this kind of a permit where we've had discussion about it before we vote. But if that's the precedent we want to set, I'm happy with it.
Well, I don't think we're setting any kind of a precedent. And anytime there is a motion, there's always an opportunity to discuss it. And we've always given the applicant an opportunity to be heard. So if there's precedent, that would be the precedent. Okay, so and this, this is one of the problems that we suffer from, is that not being able to actually let people be heard. And it is kind of bewildering that we can't bring them into the waiting room or have them. It's like every time you go to a function and nobody ran a sound check. You got to do this stuff first in order to make sure that you're going to be heard.
Well, staff, just to clarify, staff is making that opportunity available, and people are not taking it.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I tell you what. Would it be helpful if we took a 5-minute break? I mean, does that give you any more freedom so you don't have to pay any attention to us, or not?
That might be helpful, just so I can actually make contact with various parties to see what difficulty they are having at this time.
I've got 10 minutes after 7. Let's take a recess until 7:15, and then we'll come back and get this wrapped up, hopefully.
Okay, thank you.
Do I have to stare at Steve for 5 minutes?
Life could be worse, John.
You're muted.
Yeah. Seems a little different to me this time around, but what do I know? Everything's good up to Point Doom?
Oh, it's the weekends are fucking nuts out here. It really is. It's crazy. People parking on the sidewalks.
Is this being recorded? Be careful.
What?
Yeah, be careful. This may be being recorded. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think we're supposed to talk. I'll see.
My screen says it's being recorded, just so you know.
Hey, what?
My screen says that this is being recorded, just so you're aware.
Excellent.
Okay, just letting you know.
You ought to mute yourself or you get recused.
Apologies. This is Pat Donegan from the City Attorney's Office. Can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we can.
I can hear you.
Can hear you and see you.
Okay, so it's 5 minutes have gone by. What do you think? Any luck?
Alex, have you had any luck bringing Mr. Gillen in?
Parker says he's coming in now.
Oh, thank you.
I don't see him now.
You know, it's interesting. I run these. There we go. Somebody there?
Are we in session?
Don't mess around, Chris. We are
Sorry.
back in session. We are back in session.
Oh, my bad.
All right.
Seriously.
Yeah, let's move it.
Yeah, I think we have to. It does seem technology is just not there yet. Yes, Chris.
What would be, I guess this is directed to Attorney Donegan, what would be the best parallel to this in a public hearing? If they didn't attend, we'd still have the right and obligation to vote on this, right?
Sure.
Correct. Absolutely. I think the time frame that has elapsed so far, my own
Yes,
technical
I need
difficulties.
help. Bring the paper in here. Put the dog away and bring the paper in here, please.
I think he's in.
He's
Okay.
made it.
Never
Oh,
mind. He
there
is
you-
in. Yes.
There you are.
Okay, I don't see a name here, but
It's the one that says Malibu screen.
Malibu screen. Okay. Okay, you got the dog away.
Get the dog away. I apologize. Good evening.
Are you there?
Welcome.
Who have I got?
Thank you. It's Scott Gillen.
Excellent.
Okay, Scott.
Scott, you have 3 minutes.
Perfect. I'm not sure what I'm saying. I thought I was watching the meeting. I thought maybe there was questions.
Okay, no, what's happened now, Scott, is as you know, this is an administrative coastal development permit. It's been approved by staff. It comes before the planning commission. If there's 3 votes on the planning commission to have it brought back as a full coastal development permit for the full hearing, then it will be brought back. And so that's the issue that we're going to address at the conclusion of your testimony.
I have no testimony. I mean, I guess I'll take my 3 minutes if you guys can hear me. Really, everybody's somewhat talking. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Is my 3 minutes started now?
I'll start you now and then I'll let you know when 3 minutes is up. I don't see your name displayed with the clock, but I can tell you when it's 3 minutes has elapsed.
Great. Thank you. Good evening. So I started this project. I purchased it approximately 3 years ago. It had an active permit when I purchased it. We started to do the work on the project. My framers took down a wall that they had no right to take down. The project was red tagged. We had come in and explained the situation. That was not acceptable. I understood the consequences. I resubmitted the project for what you have before you tonight. I am tearing down a guest house and modifying the main house. It has been roughly 3 years as it has standed still. Other than that, I hope you would approve it. I understand that there's questions that have come up, so I guess I'll just wait to hear them. That's really all I have to say.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Is there anybody else, Renika, who's indicated a desire to speak on this matter?
Not that I
I'm
know
not
of.
Renika, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, I don't think so.
No one else has signed up to speak.
Okay, we'll close the public hearing, then we're back to the commission table. John, it was well, Chris, you have your hand up. What is it?
Yeah, I just had 2 quick questions for Renika. You had mentioned in your presentation that there were concerns raised. Who were those raised by? Was it by the public or commissioners or?
I believe a couple of concerns were from one of the commissioners, or maybe a couple, I'm not sure, regarding front yard setback and the walls and landscaping within the public right of way. And then there was a letter or an email forwarded from Craig Hill.
Got it. Okay, and then the other one, just for the ACDP eligibility, I saw the criteria listed there, and I know this project's relatively unique in that there's additionally a code enforcement issue that was called out. I guess this is this question is to Director Blue. Does that code enforcement change the ACDP eligibility at all, or that doesn't really factor in?
No, that's not a criteria. The applicant has applied for a new single-family residence since the work went over the 50% threshold. So this is being processed as a new coastal development permit. It does have a site plan review and a minor modification, but all of those things are eligible for being processed as an administrative CDP as long as it's not located in the appeal jurisdiction, and this one is not. So that's how it got before you.
Great, thank you. That was all I had for questions of staff. Thanks.
David?
Just to clarify, the front yard setback issue that we're talking about is the going from the required 65 feet to 62.5 feet. So we're talking about 2.5 feet.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay,
It's to
John,
maintain the existing front yard setback.
John, you pulled this. You want to tell us why we should bring this back for a full CDP?
Well, I've got maybe 10 items, so I'll just give you a couple. First, I question, without the detail that I can get in a full hearing, whether or not this is within 100 feet of a park, since it's right across the street from the park. That's one of them, which makes it not eligible. The fact that it has apparently, which again, I'd like a full hearing to get the explanation. We're giving them a permit to build on city property. And normally on Doom Drive, which it's on, we've been super reluctant to do that. In fact, we've turned projects down for that. I have questions on the view shed, mainly that one of the pictures shows blocking mountain views, which are included in the LIP for designated streets. Let's see here. I wonder whether the code means when you can do an ACDP that it says a house, it does not say a guest house, which I would assume is different than a house. Let's see here. I would like to know the history. I remember reading about, I got a whole page of little notes like this. There is no landscaping plan. The LIP requires a landscaping plan with all CDPs. There is talk in the staff report about that the foliage is what do you call it? Legal non-conforming when the prior CDP requires 42-inch wall.
John, let me help you out here. Maybe why don't you make your motion?
Okay.
And we'll see if you got a second, and then we'll see if there's any further discussion from anybody else, and then we'll move on.
Okay, I move we continue this item. Move this item to a full CDP hearing.
Okay, is there a second on that?
I'll second that.
Okay, is there further discussion, or I'm ready to let you go back, John, if you want to talk further about it, or is there anybody else that wants to weigh in on it so we can see whether we get the 3 votes or not?
All I just want to call it, I kind of made a reference to it before, just the fact that there was code enforcement, the fact there are kind of a number of observations in the staff report. Just, I want to have that level of comfort to get the full hearing on it. That's kind of where my head is, a little more from a general position.
Okay, being able to count to 3, I'm going to ask if there's any further discussion, and then we'll call for a vote. Hearing none, Kathleen, would you call for the roll, please?
Vice Chair Mazza,
Yes.
Commissioner Euring,
Yes.
Commissioner Marks,
Yes.
Commissioner Weil,
No.
Chair Jennings,
No.
motion carries.
Okay, that concludes item 3B3. That brings us to item 5A.
Mr.
John?
Chair, I'm going to recuse myself on instructions of the Assistant City Council.
I'm sorry, say again. You're going to recuse yourself, why?
Recuse myself upon instructions from the Assistant City Council.
City attorney?
Attorney, yeah.
Right, okay. All right, John. We'll wait for you to click off.
Bye-bye, John.
All right. Item 5A. Do we get a staff report, please? Are you on this one again, Renika? Okay.
I am, yes.
Do we need disclosures first?
I'll get a staff report, then before we open the public hearing, we'll get disclosures.
Thank you. Thank you.
That looks like the applicant's presentation.
Yeah. There we go. Good evening, Chair Jennings and members of the Planning Commission. This project, a larger version of this project was presented to the Planning Commission in January of 2019, when the commission found the project inconsistent with the neighborhood character and denied the project with a 3-2 vote. The applicant appealed that decision, and during the City Council's deliberation on the appeal, there were some concerns expressed regarding the size of the second floor, which at that time was a little over 3,000 square feet. As the council considered a motion to deny the appeal, the applicant offered to redesign the project to address the neighborhood character concerns. The council then approved a motion to remand the project back to the Planning Commission based on the applicant's offer to redesign portions of the project. The council also suggested that the applicant reach out to the concerned neighbors. So the project was revised by modifying the second floor square footage, and that is the project before the commission this evening. The project was reduced by approximately 1,200 square feet on the second floor to address neighborhood character concerns. Next slide, please. The project is an infill lot located approximately 1/3 of a mile southwest of the intersection of PCH and Zumares Drive. The project site is developed with an existing single-family residence and 2-story accessory structures, and is surrounded by 1- and 2-story residences in the neighborhood, and is directly across the street from Malibu Elementary School. Next slide, please. The project consists of the demolition of the existing development, roughly 4,700 square feet, and the construction of a new 2-story residence that's just shy of 6,400 square feet. In that square footage included are a attached garage and loggias split between the first and second floor. The project also includes a new on-site wastewater treatment system and associated development. Next slide, please. This graphic it illustrates the project revisions that were made to the original design to address the neighborhood character concerns. On the far left, so let me orient yourself, I guess. Great Fox is along the bottom, and then there's a stream that runs along the northern property line. So the aqua second floor that's depicted in the far left graphic was the original design. The ground floor remains unchanged at 4,500, a little over 4,500 square feet, and the original design, as mentioned before, was a little over 3,000 square feet. The middle graphic shows the project revisions, again, with the aqua being the original footprint of the second floor and the yellow is the proposed. And on the far right is the project currently before you, where the second floor was reduced by approximately 1,200 square feet with a net total of 1,840 square feet on the second floor. Next slide, please. As a part of the project revisions, a bedroom was removed to the, I think on this graphic would be to the right of the tower. And the remaining portion of the floor area was reconfigured to create a little bit more articulation in the front facade and by shrinking the rest of the second floor area. This graphic shows the slight change by shaving off some of the TDSF to slightly reduce the massing as viewed from Gray Fox Street. Next slide, please. This graphic is an east elevation showing some modifications to the cover loggia areas that were that kind of opened up and created an additional articulation along the eastern facade of the proposed structure. Next slide, please. Since the notice of public hearing was published, there have been some concerns raised about the project. One of the concerns raised was regarding the applicant not reaching out to the neighbors as suggested by the city council. There was also a concern about the trellis area and that it doesn't really affect the massing of the structure. And I just wanted to add a note that trellis areas have traditionally been excluded from total development square footage when staff checks plans for conformance with the code. And the project has been redesigned consistent with that interpretation. There was another concern about language in the LIP that governs multi-story development and that it should be cited in a way that does not block views. And the staff's response to that concern, there have been several occasions in which staff has conducted visual analysis for this project site. And there's nothing about this project that indicates that views would be blocked by the proposed project. Moreover, there are no primary view determinations recorded or requested by the adjacent property owners. There was another concern raised regarding the calculations for second floor area for surrounding residences. As attached to your staff report, there are calculations provided for one of the neighbors that basically analyzes the second floor sizes for residences in the area. And there's another set of calculations provided by the applicant team where some different methods were used to measure second floor square footage. In this calculation and averaging process, there is a difference. So like if you have all of the residences in the area that are both 1 and 2 story, staff did not include the 1-story residences in this calculation. But one of the concerns raised was that all residences, including those that have 1 story, should be included in the calculation to determine the average size. Next slide, please. And with that, this concludes my presentation, and staff recommends the adoption of resolution 20-51 approving the coastal permit and the associated discretionary requests. And I am available for any questions.
All right, thank you. Can we get disclosures, please, Steve?
I visited the site the first time it came before us. This time, all I did was had a video conference with Don Schmitz to go through it. Didn't learn a lot more, although, however, it does seem like this is another episode of the Twilight Zone, because I thought this whole neighborhood character stuff was something the city council yelled at us out about a couple of weeks ago. So just, it was interesting. That's all I know.
David.
Went to the site, met with Don Schmitz there, received a letter direct emailed to me from the neighbor, then had a phone call with Don to discuss the issues raised in the email, all of which have been addressed in Renika's report.
David, was the email you received made part of the public record?
Yes, it was circulated by Bonnie just I'm sorry, by Kathleen, maybe an hour before the meeting.
Okay, fine. Chris.
As I disclosed last item. I did have a site visit, wrong item, still same statement. And I did speak with Don Schmitz about it. Really didn't learn anything more. And there has been some communication by email, which also were part of the public record.
Okay, I met also with Don Schmitz last Friday for about a half an hour, toured the site, looked at the story poles, and I again reviewed my sort of review of the whole area of Gray Fox as it slopes down toward the corner, and in general the layout of the properties, the existence of existing foliage, and so on. Okay, so that being said, we will now, yes, Steve.
Just a quick question. With only 4 of us around left, how does the voting work? If it's if 3 votes go one way, that we understand that, but if it's a 2-2 tie, what happens then?
2-2 tie. Go ahead, Pat.
Oh, please, Chair. After you. I did not mean to interrupt. I thought it was directed towards me, but if you would like to take it, by all means, go
It
ahead.
probably was directed toward you. I just jumped in. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So you would need an affirmative vote, a majority of the quorum here. So if it was 2-2, it would effectively be a denial. At which point the applicant could of course appeal it to the city council. But yes, you need at least 3.
Thank you very much.
And that appeal process is the same as a 3-2 vote against. Sorry, like there's no
Correct.
difference.
Yeah, there's no difference in the appeal process between 2-2, 1-3, or 0-4, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, the only thing I would say is that any motion that has a 2-2 vote fails, whether it's a motion to deny or a motion to grant. Right?
Sure. And then I guess at that point the failure of the motion to approve would effectively serve as the denial.
Okay.
Sorry, just for a technicality, then does the failure of a denial lead to an approval?
No, it does not.
Okay,
no, no,
thank you.
no.
Just making sure.
It basically just means we'd be spinning our wheels and we didn't.
Correct.
Okay, so let's open the public hearing. I assume Don is the.
If I may, Chair Jennings,
Yes,
I would
Chris.
like to ask a question of Renika in case Don wants to address it, if you don't mind.
Sure, go ahead.
The one question, Renika, which has been spinning in my head, and I tried to get on the 3D view and everything to see what I could figure out. Does anyone at a legal second story on a lot kind of built at the highest point of those lots actually pick up an ocean view, which could even be blocked? Just to kind of understand, we know PVD's in place, but is that something that potentially could become an issue in the future, just for my own context?
I honestly am not sure, but I will pull up an aerial and kind of do some tilting and manipulation of it to see if possibly some residences within 1,000 feet would potentially be affected by the project.
Thank you. And then I'm sure Mr. Schmitz could talk to that as well if he has additional information. So thank you for that, Chair Jennings.
Sure. Let me just say that Bonnie, you had your hand up.
I'm sorry. Commissioner Marks, were you asking in the context of existing developments that could have views blocked, or I thought you were mentioning in the future?
Well, I'm just trying to get some context. There's clearly a point of contention within the neighborhood as to kind of the impacts of that higher structure. And so even though I recognize that the question may not be directly relevant because no one is currently there, I just want to have the context of, if nobody can even have a determination, now we're in the future, why are we even kind of considering a view impact? So I just want to get a little context, and I'll be honest, it could influence my decision if there is the observation that, yeah, clearly from that second story, you'd pick up ocean view. In my book, that would be material, so.
Okay.
Well, maybe I should clarify that the comment that came in regarding view blockage had to do with affecting the immediately adjacent neighbors, not those that would, have protection within 1,000 feet of the project site.
Got it. And they were concerned, those neighbors, about their ocean view?
No, it was a letter from Craig Hill that identified the potential for view blockage from the neighbors, but no one has filed a PVD, nor does it appear that the second story would block the neighbors' views.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I will let me add that in the time I've been involved in the city, we have never protected hypothetical views that might be there if somebody built a house that allowed the view to be developed. I mean, that way, that's a rabbit hole that we've never really pursued.
Understood.
Gone down. Okay, so Don Schmitz, I think, has got 15 minutes, or Don and his team have 15 minutes. Do we know who's on Don's team, Kathleen?
We just show that Don Schmitz has signed up, and let me just check. He's the only one that has signed up for his team.
Okay, 15 minutes then, please.
It may say 3. I'm sorry. I can, but it does say 15 on mine, so I can.
It says 3 here, but it's 15 in your heart. Okay.
It is, and I'm hoping it updates sooner than later. But I can let Mr. Schmitz know when he's reached a certain point if you'd like to reserve time for rebuttal, because there are a couple other people that wish to speak as well from members of the public.
Right, and let me know too.
Oh, of course. I'm so sorry.
Let's go with Don. Can we get him? Is he here?
Kathleen, can you hear me?
There he is. Got him.
We can.
If you would please set the clock, I'd like to reserve 5 minutes for rebuttal. So I'm going to try and get the main body of the presentation done in 10 minutes.
Okay.
So, and I'm going to move quickly on these slides. Good evening, commissioners. Don Schmitz on behalf of the applicants. I appreciate your time. Next slide, please. The hearings history was already, in fact, much of my presentation was already covered by Renika. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. So the surrounding neighborhood, the 500-foot radius, is obviously a key component of the analysis in the staff report for your deliberations tonight, commissioners. So we've tabulated all the second stories in the area. Next slide, please. So these are the homes which are one-story homes. Next slide. And these are all the two-story homes. Next slide, please. So 57% of the homes within that 500-foot radius are 2 stories. Next slide, please. And this is reflected in the staff report. One of the previous staff reports says we have a mixture of 1- and 2-story residences, many of them sited closer to Gray Fox and the surrounding streets. Next slide, please. The number of stories on Gray Fox itself, which is kind of its own little sub-neighborhood because you've got the school across the street and then you've got side streets going off. 3 of the 5 existing homes are 2 stories. Next slide, please. So this is the proposed design layout, and you can see the width of the lot is 137.5 feet. That's going to be important on a point of some discussion later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. So this is just one of the comments of one of the council members, Mayor Pearson, and when he provided direction to us, it was to redesign the second story. And he went on to say, it's definitely, as we said, it's not a TDSF issue. It is a neighborhood character issue, which seems consistent with your previous deliberations. Next slide, please. Nonetheless, as far as TDSF goes, the allowable TDSF for this property is 8,047 square foot. We were originally proposing 7,590 square foot, and we've reduced that down to 6,396 square foot. Next slide, please. So we've tabulated all these second stories within that 500-foot radius. We use building permits, documents, and photogrammetry, which is a basis for surveys. It's a very accurate synopsis. Next slide. And so, in fact, the second stories on average within that 500-foot radius is 1,842 square foot. Next slide, please. We'll just blow past this because Renika stole my thunder already on this. And here is a little bit more detail on it. On the original proposal, the second floor was 3,073 square foot. We've shrunk that down by over 1,200 square foot to 1,840 square foot. Next slide. Which represents a 40% reduction on the second story that was before you previously, commissioners. That's not an inconsequential reduction. We think it's a very good faith effort to address everybody's concerns. Next slide, please. So where is that reduction coming from? Well, at the back of the property, it's listed as a reduction of a bedroom. It's almost a total elimination of a bedroom. Yes, we eliminated the covered loggia because that was included in the original square footage for the second floor, but that's not the lion's share. It's about 300 square feet. We eliminated, carved off a couple feet on the back westerly side of the property. We completely eliminated a bedroom on the north and the northeasterly side, the easterly side of the tower, which is the side closest to Mr. Stockwell. And then we reduced the size of the bedroom facing Gray Fox on the southerly side of the property. Next slide, please. Renika already showed you this. Next slide, please. And she showed you this one as well. But one of the things that was not discussed much in Renika's presentation is you can see in the back of the property where we whacked off the whole rear portion of the structure, the second story. And what you really can't see quite as well, it's highlighted in yellow, is on the easterly side of the tower. That's where we completely eliminated the bedroom. Next slide, please. And the staff report reflects this, that the change was intended to help the project better blend with the surrounding 1- and 2-story single-family residences. Next slide, please. So I'd like to talk a little bit about, because not everybody was at the previous hearings, some aspects of the development proposal as it pertains to Mr. Stockwell's property. So we are proposing a 1-story, 17.5-foot tall structure on the easterly side, which is adjacent to Mr. Stockwell's property. Next slide, please. That's going to be 13, almost 14 foot away from the property line. Next slide. And you can see that there's already a building of almost identical height in the same location. Next slide. That building is set back 10 foot from Mr. Stockwell's property line. Next slide. We're actually pulling it back to almost 14 foot. So the portion of the development proposed next to Mr. Stockwell is getting pulled back. Next slide, please. So he did submit an objection letter saying the turrets and viewing room look directly into his property. Next slide, please. So the tower is 28 foot. Next slide, please. That tower is located 91 feet from his studio. Next slide, please. The studio, which has nothing but an unbroken wall facing our property, no windows, no doors, and there's a garage below it. Next slide, please. The tower is located 121 feet from his house. Next slide, please. And bedrooms number 1 and 2, next slide, please, are located 116 feet from his guest house. Next slide, please, which is graded down. So his roof level is at the floor level of the Atwill's proposed house. Next slide, please. And the other bedroom is 106 feet from his studio. Next slide, please. As you can see, where he has no windows or doors. Next slide, please. And 136 feet from the main body of his house. And the reason that's important, you remember I gave you the width of our property. The second story of this house is located basically as far away as the width of our property. It's as if we were putting the second story of this project on the next lot over. That's not looming over Mr. Stockwell's house. Now, this is not a code compliance issue, but it speaks towards a design which is trying to be mindful of the concerns of our next door neighbor. Next slide. And this is reflected in the staff, one of the previous staff reports, which goes on to say that the subject property is designed with a 2-story portion sited on the western side of the project, which minimizes impacts to the easterly neighbor, AKA Mr. Stockwell. Next slide, please. So this is the previous elevation of the house, which was before you in red, and you can see in yellow the elevation of Mr. Stockwell's 2-story house. Next slide, please. And this is the reduction that we have brought before you tonight. Next slide, please. So we've gone from 45 foot width of the 2-story facing the street. We've shrunk it down to 36.5 feet. Mr. Stockwell's 2-story is 26 feet facing the street. Next slide, please. 2 buildings up, the 2-story building is 110 feet wide facing the street. This is of critical importance. How much of that 2-story is going to be have its broad section facing Gray Fox? Next slide, please. In addition, we've got a full 65-foot front yard setback, whereas Mr. Stockwell reduced his front yard setback by 50%. Plus, we have another 10 foot that's only 1 story. Next slide, please. In fact, we've got one of the greatest front yard setbacks for the section of Gray Fox, which is very, very important in regards to potential visual impacts and neighborhood character. Next slide. And this is reflected in the staff report. It says the nearest part of the first floor is the full 65 feet, but most of the building is 70 to 80 feet back. Next slide, please. So the building footprints on the Gray Fox property, let's talk about that briefly. Next slide, please. This is Mr. Stockwell's house. Next slide. This is our next door neighbors, 1 story, but 50% front yard setback. Very nice house. Next slide. This is the way our house will look based on the story poles. As you can see, because it's set back further, it's not as visible as the 1 story right next door. Next slide, please. And this is 29075 Gray Fox. Next slide, please. And as you can see, it is rather imposing. I'm going to have to move faster. I'm running out of time. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. So the second story analysis. Next slide, please. Next slide. So 6934 Grasswood Avenue has a second story. Next slide. Next slide. We calculated it at 2,189 square foot based upon the photogrammetry. Mr. Stockwell put it at 1340. Next slide, please. Right next door, 6938 Grasswood. Next slide. Next slide. This is a building permit. We went and we researched the building permits, commissioners. Next slide, please.
Excuse me, Mr. Schmitz, you're at 5 minutes left.
I know, I got to keep going. I got to get this done. So the addition was 2,815 square foot pursuant to the building permit and the photogrammetry. Next slide. Mr. Stockwell calculated it at 1,520 square foot, about half of what the building permits and the photogrammetry show it to be. Next slide, please. I want to give you one other example. These are the 2 houses we were just looking at. Next slide. And so the last one I'm going to show you is 6936 Fernhill. Next slide, please. Next slide. This is another building permit issued by the city of Malibu. Next slide, please. And you can see it's for a 1,547 square foot second story addition to this house issued by the city of Malibu in 2007. Next slide, please. Mr. Stockwell says it's 1,200 square foot. It's 1,547 square foot. And I'm going to have to wrap it up there to make sure I reserve enough time for rebuttal, which will be about 4 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schmitz. Kathleen, who do we have next?
We have John Stockwell.
Okay, Mr. Stockwell, you're up. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I just got unmuted. You guys hear me?
We can hear you, yes. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks for hearing this. I do wish, as was mentioned earlier, that our neighbors were able to donate time, because I had a number of them that wanted to give me time to speak. And I also want to, echo what's already been said, that it's just, above all, really unfortunate that after being denied on a neighborhood character finding by the Planning Commission, finding upheld by the City Council, and that Don Schmitz, applicant, never reached out to me, never reached out to the neighbors to even talk about, what our potential solutions could be. I understand that they could come back and say, we met with them, they're being unreasonable, but to not even meet seems to fly in the face of wanting to, to work with the neighbors. And I think look, the whole idea, I've never claimed this was a TDSF issue. I've never claimed that there's some magical number of second story square footage. All I said was the amount of second story bulk and mass is blocking the light, impacting our privacy of myself and the neighbors. And, Don is a master at this. I know he knows, like, let me change a covered loggia to a terrace loggia. Let me, that way it doesn't get included in the second story square footage. But I think it's just misleading in terms of the overall bulking and mass and the impact. And even the area that they removed the structure and turned it into an open deck on the north side, that's the area that has the least impact, because we don't have any properties that is the area deepest in the lot that doesn't look down upon us. And I also think that it is important, if you're trying to characterize a neighborhood, and the average amount of second story square footage in the neighborhood is to include all the homes in the neighborhood. So if you did that, even with his figures, it would be, you know, would be much less than the number he's calculating. And I just don't think, I think it's only fair. Like if you have a neighborhood with 30 homes and 2 of them have 10,000 square feet of second story, you don't determine that the neighborhood has an average of 10,000 square feet of second story. That's not how the neighborhood would be characterized. And he has, you know, he pointed out the examples. I had the neighbors actually measure their own properties. He has the house at 29075 Gray Fox is having 4,290 square feet of second story. The entire square footage of the house is 4,160. So, I mean, ultimately, anyone can drive through this neighborhood and realize that all those homes with all that second story were all permitted and built before the city of Malibu became a city. And there is such an emphasis now. The reason there is a site plan review process when you go above 18 feet, because they're trying to keep neighborhoods lower profile, lower slung. They realize the impact that second story has on a neighborhood. And, you know, this is just a critical issue for the community. This isn't a TDSF issue. This isn't a 2/3 rule. This is a project that was rejected by the Planning Commission. It was a decision upheld by the City Council on a neighborhood character finding. And that was a first for the council to uphold a neighborhood character finding. And I know Don knows how to work the system. I just don't think that at this point it can get approved on inaccurate calculations and flawed calculations. They want to argue that the project is consistent with the neighborhood standards, and it's imperative they supply everyone with accurate assessment and numbers that accurately reflect the standards of the neighborhood. And, you know, I just think when he says, you know, we operated in good faith, and it's not operating in good faith if you never reach out to the neighbors. They look at my project with no windows, the second story, my 674 second story square footage of my studio. The reason
we're at past the 3 minutes. So
okay, just 1 second. The reason it has no second story is because my planner, Holly, said to go to Charlene Cabrins, and she requested that no windows look down on her property and that we move the property 10 feet to the north and closer to the property because she had done her own sun study. We did it. Doug Burge worked with me. He said, you know, you could do whatever you want. Obviously, you don't have to do this, but it makes sense to talk to the neighbors and work with the neighbors. And that's the reason that my second floor art studio has no windows.
That your time has expired, Mr. Stockwell. Thank you.
Chair, we have Matthew Palmieri, but I'm not sure that I see him in the meeting at the moment. I don't believe he is showing up unless he's under a different name that I'm not interpreting properly.
No, but we've got to do something about this. This is not working well.
Is there anyone else still in the meeting, Kathleen? This is Pat Donegan from the City Attorney's Office.
There are no other people signed up to speak, just Matthew Palmieri, and then we have Don Schmitz's rebuttal time.
Okay,
Sure.
so you I'm sorry, Pat, did you want to say something?
No, please do go ahead, Chair.
Do you have any hope of getting Mr. Palmieri? I mean, do you see anything, any indication that he might be somewhere near?
I'm not sure if Alex saw him earlier in the meeting, but I had not.
No, he's not there.
Okay.
Okay.
How do we know he was trying to speak on this? He was on before but dropped?
No, he just signed up prior to the meeting starting. Sometimes
And then never showed up online?
Sometimes they don't turn up at the meeting. Kind of like when they fill out a speaker slip and then leave.
Right.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Schmitz, you've got what, 4 minutes left? Is that what it was?
Yes, let me pull it up, please. Okay, 4 minutes. Mr. Schmitz, you may begin.
He's muted right now.
Let's see if we can get him.
Who does the unmuting? Is that you, Kathleen? There you go.
Yes, she just gave me the unmuting button. And before we start the time, could I work with Kathleen to get me to the right slide because I ran long in the presentation? Kathleen, could you start at my rebuttal, please?
Parker, can you get that particular item up?
Okay, and I want to get us to the right slide before we start. Next slide. It's 3-4 slides and keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Next. 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 Okay, we'll start here. All right, let me get my stopwatch going too here because I want to keep it real. All right, Don Schmitz on behalf of the applicant. This again is 6936 Fernhill Drive. Next slide, please. As you can see, once again, this has a building permit for a 1,547 square foot second story. Next slide, please. That's the building permit. You can see Mr. Stockwell said it's 1,200 square foot. It's not. Next slide, please. 6938 Grasswood. Next slide. Again, a building permit, and this is confirmed with the photogrammetry that we did. 2,815 square foot second story. Next slide, please. We showed it as 2,815 square foot. Mr. Stockwell whacked it almost in half to 1,520. He asserted that it should be accurate information. We agree. We've given very accurate scientific information. He has not provided any substantial, credible information to support his position. Next slide, please. So the TDSF has already been discussed. We have dropped it dramatically for this proposed house. Next slide, please. We have a 6,396 square foot home with a full front yard setback, whereas Mr. Stockwell, who's been consistently attacking our client's application, has a 7,197 square foot home with a 50% reduction in the front yard setback. Next slide, please. So let's compare those numbers. What he originally submitted to the city is 1,242 square foot for the second stories in the area. We know it's 1,842 square foot. Next slide, please. More recently, Mr. Stockwell has submitted a new calculation affirming that the second story average is 702 square foot, which was a bit of a head scratcher until we went and we looked at it. Next slide, please. And saw that basically he was putting a zero value in there for one-story homes to further try and crank down the square footage as it pertains to the neighborhood average. Now, the question that was put forward in the deliberations of the city council, what they tasked us with wasn't whether or not we should have a second story at all. Of course, that is within the discretion of the planning commission and the council, because you do have to make site plan review findings for neighborhood character. But they said, bring us back a project that has a second story that's plus or minus within the average for the area. And that is exactly what we have done here. And in regards to communications with Mr. Stockwell, you should understand that we've had actually a number of conversations with Mr. Stockwell. My client has met with Mr. Stockwell, but Mr. Stockwell has told us repeatedly that he's fine with us building an 8,000 square foot home. He just doesn't want there to be a second story. In fact, if you look at one of the hearings, you'll see between 219.30 and 219.50 where he said the exact same thing. And when I broached the subject to my client, he told me that Mr. Stockwell told him that an old guy like him should be happier with a one-story home. Accordingly, we didn't think that it was going to be a constructive engagement talking to Mr. Stockwell about how to redesign the second story of this house when his position has always been we shouldn't have a second story at all. So the last point is, in regards to the terrace, I understand he wants you to fixate on the loggia, but that's really a 300 square foot out of a 1,200 square foot reduction. And the code specifies that we had to include that in the first place. We've eliminated bedrooms, a significant amount of square footage. I think we followed through in good faith the directions we were given. So I thank you for your time, and I'm available for any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schmitz. Kathleen, is there anybody else who's asked to speak on this item?
There is not.
All right, we'll close the public hearing at this time then. We'll come back to the commission table. Commissioner, who would like to speak?
I got
Chris.
a couple of just clarifications again first. I know there is some discussion on this second floor calculation. There was attachment 3. Obviously, the applicant had a presentation as well. I guess this is either directed to Planner Brooks or Director Blue. Do we have any kind of precedent or guidance that staff would, advise we to keep into account when looking at kind of a, this kind of a discussion? I mean, I have an opinion, but I didn't know if there's anything in the code which would guide us to how to work through this.
Bonnie, you're muted.
She's working on it.
There, sorry. Windows popping up left and right. Let's see. So I think it's within your discretion to decide what fits the neighborhood character. As we've discussed in the past, staff's recommendations have stemmed from the aesthetic, how a project blends in aesthetically with the neighborhood based on its size, bulk, and height. And we use the story polls to get a good idea of that. Where there are not complaints about views, we have not focused about private views, I should say. We have not focused on that as a major issue because if a property owner isn't complaining about a view issue, it would be kind of strange for staff to impose their own concern where the neighbor isn't expressing it. And then if there were public view impacts, we would certainly take that into consideration. There just aren't any public view impacts given where this home is sited. So if you want to take square footage into consideration, there's not anything in the code as far as a second floor size other than the 2/3 rule to guide you about that. And the minimum square footage, the project fits in with both of those standards. It's well under both of those standards. So really, I think it comes down to what your individual ideas are about how this project fits with neighborhood character. And I would recommend that you treat it the same way that you have other projects as far as what you consider.
Got it. Thank you for that. So, I mean, just in terms of kind of where my head is on that to kind of start the discussion. First off, I mean, Don and team, I think you have done a good job of documenting where your stand is. You've made good illustrations. Your research, as always, are well thought through and positioned. Makes sense fundamentally. I'm a little, we probably have some differences in how we talk about finding an average of the neighborhood second story, because personally, I think we should have some calculation taking into account that lack of a second story. But kind of putting those kinds of details aside, my main concern is that if this passes through here and or is rejected through here and you come back into city council, I'm concerned that however you get there, whatever the vote is here, could you get denied by that body if you end up there? Because their guidance was to get input from neighbors based obviously on the letters submitted, their public comment, et cetera. It didn't appear that input was there. You've given the position as to why it wasn't collected, but city's council direction wasn't really that this is a math problem. It's really like a localized discussion. So I'm hesitant to prove this as things stand right now because it seems to go just directly against that guidance that was given to us. So the other thing, just for a discussion, kind of the covered versus uncovered loggia on the TDSF. I mean, in terms of the discussion about mass and bulk, when you look at it from the street or from the side, it still looks, what it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, still a duck. It ends up looking like mass and bulk. So in that sense, I don't know that the kind of the illustrations you showed with the yellow and purple, I don't know that some of that should be shaded purple because it still looks like, from a bulk and mass perspective, something which is kind of going against the neighborhood character. Those are my initial thoughts. I'm open to discussion, obviously, through the rest of the commissioners, but that's kind of how I'm seeing this one out of the gate.
Okay. Anybody else? David?
Yeah, I don't read it that way, Chris. I'm just going by the words of the report that's in front of us. It said, first of all, this indicates, contrary to what Mr. Stockwell said, if I'm understanding it correctly, that the council did not deny the project. It was withdrawn and remanded, and it said also suggested the applicant reach out to the neighbor, not neighborhood. And I've been given a lot of grief by a lot of you and not turning these things into a popularity contest. And it's clear what you have here is an impasse with a neighbor who doesn't want a house with a second story next to him. When we had our house here, there was a fire rebuild next to us. The architect came to us and said, tell me all your concerns and we'll try to address them. We gave them a list of 10 or 20 and we never heard another word. And they did things that we didn't really like. And sometimes that happens and it's unfortunate. I think we have a situation here that's very similar to that. There are 13 houses out of 20 in this neighborhood that have second floors. I think the neighborhood character is pretty clear. This is a neighborhood that has second stories. It may be unacceptable to this particular neighbor, and I feel badly about that. But I don't see any reason with anything that's in front of us that suggests that the applicant hasn't done what he has been asked to do by the city council. You know, it might have been nice if they sat down together all at once and clearly not reached an agreement, which is what would have happened. But I think the stakes on either side are pretty clear here. And it's hard for me to see what else could be done that is going to resolve the situation. So I have some sympathy for the applicant here.
Steve, you got it.
Yeah, I think, and David, I believe what happened at the city council table was that they were on their way to denying the project and they gave the applicant an out to go back and try and fix it.
Yeah, I agree.
So saying that they weren't going to deny it may not have been an accurate representation. I guess my major concern goes back to with what Chris had. These guys got to live together. You mentioned it, okay? Some neighbor built a house next to you. You were not happy with. You'd have been much happier if that person would have sat down with you and sort of figured out something to make it work, you know, for both of you, right? And these people are going to be living next door to each other for a long time, I would suspect. To have them sort of peeing in each other's leg while that's going on is probably not the way we want to have the city constructed. So I am disappointed that there was not more communication between the two of them. Okay, I think and I don't know what the end result would be. I mean, you may be right. There may be an impasse that we may not be able to get through, but you got to try. And I believe the city council's instruction was try. And with the lack of trying, you know, I'm just not happy with that.
Yes, David.
I understand your point. I guess my point is it might have been disappointing to me that the architect didn't listen to us, but I don't have the legal right to make the architect listen to me. And I don't think that's the case here, given how far removed on this property this second floor is from areas of Mr. Stockwell's house that would be of concern, you know, other than simply reducing the size there, you know, to make Mr. Stockwell happy. I just think that we're demanding too much of somebody who has tried to do what they were tasked with doing. Yeah, I agree with you. It might have been nice if they'd sat down next to one another and then disagreed instead of doing it however this happened. I don't see the outcome being any different.
Well, I would have at least liked to have seen, you know, we get these numbers, all right? And I can't tell you whose numbers are right? Everybody's, you know, and it would have been nice if they would at least have agreed on a set of numbers. And that may have said, okay, once we do that, it leads us to a solution. But I mean, right now, again, no conversation. It hasn't gotten them any closer.
The city council, everybody in the city, and this has always been the way it's been, you know, oh, it'd be better, you know, it's always better if you work with your neighbors to try and avoid the conflicts. I don't think there's any argument about that. And the councils particularly always like to have, you know, people, you know, work it out. So, you know, so that neither of you votes against me next time. But the problem is that at some point you have to say, okay, these are the rules. Does the project fall within the rules or not? And in this particular case, the issue is whether or not this project has an adverse impact on neighborhood character. And I just can't see it. The way the project is aligned, you can't see it really from the street. I mean, it's not my favorite style of architecture, believe me. But in terms of the impact, in terms of views from the street, you really can't see it. From the way the property is located on the sloping hill as grass would distends, there really isn't any interference. You've got tons of mature vegetation all over the place that block whatever uphill and downhill views there might have been. And in terms of coming back and saying, well, yeah, this project has a negative impact on this neighborhood, I don't think that can be reasonably made. And so I would support the project. And I think that was your position last time when this was up here, Steve.
Yeah. Well, and it wasn't until they said, look, and I go back, you know, we had the Soho, the little house there on next to Nobu, where they were having a battle with all their neighbors over noise, right? And the rule was they were not allowed to have noise there. And that was what we said. And so we solved it by saying, go talk to each other.
Right.
Right? Go talk to each other, figure something out, because there's got to be a way to accommodate both parties. And they did it. They went out of their way. And, you know, and prior to that, I was getting videos every couple of weeks from the neighbors who were so upset that this music was taking place. So it can be done. And I'm just disappointed they didn't do it in this case.
Well, and it's one thing to be disappointed, and it's always better if people talk it out and try to work it out in advance.
Right.
But the question is whether you then say, okay, well, you weren't able to talk to these people, so therefore that's a basis for denial. I don't see it. There's nothing in the code that indicates that that's a basis for denial.
No, but there was the instruction from the city council to do that. That's what they said. It's in the staff report.
Yeah, I know. Okay. So let's get a motion to deny or a motion to approve so we can go home. David.
I'd like to make a motion to approve.
All right. Staff recommendation.
Yes.
I'll second it. Is there further discussion? Call the roll, Kathleen, please.
Commissioner Weil,
Yes.
I do want to ask one question. Obviously, the applicant has heard our conversation here. I would ask if the applicant would want to take a minute to discuss with his team to see if they would want to ask for a continuance before we, because stalemate or not, if it will go to city council, and I think they see that coming. So I know it's often a courtesy we give.
We can do that. Certainly, that's not a problem. If you can unmute Don Schmitz. Mr. Schmitz, you've heard the discussion here. Is there anything that you would like to suggest as a way of avoiding a 2-2 deadlock or possible discussions?
Of course, Chair Jennings, to the rest of the commissioners. Look, I understand and candidly agree both with the specifics, but also the tenor of a lot of the comments of all the commissioners. And I think that you've known me all for a very long period of time, and I have a long history of trying to negotiate solutions with next door neighbors in very great detail and some expense to my clients. Now, what I want to put out there for you is the reason we did not reach out to Mr. Stockwell is he had just told us. I'm trying to answer, Pat.
Okay. And so I understand that. I apologize for interrupting. I just want to make sure that you do zero in on Commissioner Marks's comment and do not veer to the side of advocacy. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. I do know the rules, and I am speaking right to the point of which is in front of the commission. And I'm going to leave it up to them to provide direction to me. So it is extremely atypical for me not to sit down with the next door neighbor to try and work it out. And the reason that I didn't, and this is especially to Commissioners Marks and Uring, was because he told us that no second story. Now,
okay.
So I would be willing if in fact this is the direction of Commissioner Uring and Marks, if they want to continue this and they want me to go sit down with Mr. Stockwell, of course I will do that. It's disappointing. We'd like to get approved and move on. But if you think that there is that is something that's fruitful, look, gentlemen, I will follow your direction on it.
Well, and I know we're getting into debate. The vote is called but not yet done. I just wanted to point out that the reason I'm giving that direction is that that's your decision. It's our guidance to you as the representative, and I'm just pointing out what I see as the obvious, that you could get to city council and have more risk than you have right here. That's the only reason I'm bringing it up.
Well, let's not. waste time that didn't need to be wasted. You both have both Chris and Steve have kind of indicated that this failure to talk is a key element in the decision. And so it doesn't make much sense to send the applicant out to have, another series of discussions with Mr. Stockwell if that is not going to be productive. And there's no way that you can actually say this, but I mean, you understand that what I'm talking about is that is that really a key element in your thinking, then I would support continuing the matter. If it's not a key element in your thinking, then I have trouble supporting a continuance because it would be a waste of time.
Yeah, it's a key element because that's directly what
Right.
council asked for. In my perception, that's where I am.
Okay, so let me ask you, David, were you willing to withdraw your motion? And I'm willing to withdraw the second if we can get a motion to continue the matter along the lines that Commissioner Marks has suggested.
Yes, I'm willing to do that. I have a question for Commissioner Marks related to that.
Go ahead and ask it.
If this instruction is followed and the result is you can build a teeny tiny little, second floor that is unrealistic in all of our views, does that satisfy your?
No, that's the question you can't really ask him.
Correct. Yeah. I do have to jump in here. There can't really be any. This all obviously isn't a quid pro quo, but you can't say go out and do X, Y, and Z, and then no matter what, I'll vote for your project in the future. I understand there's kind of this gray area, and we're kind of getting up to that line.
Well, let me rephrase that.
Yeah,
Is the fact of having a discussion what you are after?
I'm looking to basically follow the guidance I see written up by staff reflecting council. This is the first time that I'm aware of this kind of coming this full circle from us to them back to us. So I just don't really want to have I don't want to leave this applicant in a spot where they get screwed without being aware of kind of what they were stepping into. I'd rather slow it down a bit and have them, okay, we just could not, we're at an impasse, whatever their outcome is, then they report that to us. I think it's safer for them, honestly.
Do you?
And I'm looking for a resolution, David.
So if there's
Sure. Everyone's looking for a resolution.
Okay. All right. So let's see if there's a motion to continue the matter.
Sorry.
So just real quick, and once again, I'm sure Mr. Schmitz already knows this. By no means is this motion to continue with this direction any guarantee whatsoever of a vote anyway, one way or the other, in a future continued hearing. That's all I wanted to say.
I think in a cynical world, I'm pretty sure he's doing that. So, Chris, your motion is?
Yeah, I would move that we do table this and I forget the phrase.
No, we continue the matter to a date uncertain, Bonnie, or how do we think we want to?
If we could do it to a date certain, that would help us out as far as.
Let's build some fire under. Give us a date.
Let's see. Yes. I think we would need to go. Sorry, give me 1 second. A little bitty laptop doesn't give you a lot of space to work with. Okay, so we will be putting out the August 17th packet this week. So I think we are looking at September 8th.
Okay, so the motion would be to continue the matter to the September 8th regular hearing. Would that be your motion, Chris?
Yes, and I would ask, since this is ultimately a decision of Don Schmitz as the representative, unless there's any problem with that, Attorney Donegan, is it okay for him to just confirm that that would work for his team from what they're trying to get done, understanding our position, or is that something we just have to decide ourselves?
We can ask Don if he has any fatal problems with that date.
Thank you.
Don can be unmuted. Date, Don.
Yeah, this is Don, for the record, representing Don Schmitz, representing the applicant. I understand our marching orders. We will abide by those timelines, and we will reach out to Mr. Stockwell to meet with him next order of business tomorrow.
Great, thank you. Then that is my motion.
I'll
Okay,
second.
that's moved and seconded. Further discussion? Hearing none, call the roll, please, Kathleen.
1 moment. Commissioner Marks,
Yes.
Commissioner Euring,
Yes.
Commissioner Weil.
Yes.
1 moment. Chair Jennings.
Yes.
Motion